All right. Today I'm going to give you some notes on some of the different types of genetics problems that you may see. And that is in the form of the Advanced Genetics Problems Packet, the same one that I gave you before, only this one's the full version. So the first part that I gave you, questions 1 through 20, were just multiple choice questions that didn't really require any Punnett square practice. The rest of the packet requires actual Punnett square doing. So I attached those. So if you get it open and you're like, oh, this is the same one we did before, scroll down and you'll see what I'm talking about. But I want to talk a little bit. We talked on Friday about incomplete dominance and how it is possible to have pink flowers if you have a gene that shows incomplete dominance. Neither of the alleles is dominant or recessive, but rather when you put the two together, they blend, and you get something that's in the middle, in this case, pink, in the case of carnations. I want to go on today, and I want to talk about the one thing we didn't cover or give an example of was this thing called codominance. And I held off on that because we're going to do an example of that, but we're also going to look at what we call multiple alleles. So far we have talked about traits where there's a dominant allele and there's a recessive allele. There's only two. That's it. Dominant or recessive. But there's a lot of cases where genes exist in multiple forms, not just two. And a really good example of that students I feel like kind of like is talking about blood type. So in blood type, you actually have 3 different alleles that you can have, and that corresponds to what those alleles produce. They either produce an A or a B carbohydrate on their red blood cells, or they don't produce any carbohydrate on their red blood cells. And so you can have an allele for blood type that is A or B, or the one that has no carbohydrate is called O. Okay, so kind of like 0. O. And that's shown in this chart on the next page. And it's just, these are kind of made up, but they illustrate the point, which is the different blood types that you can have are that way because the alleles are producing a specific carbohydrate that attaches to the cell membrane of the red blood cell. And in the case of A, it looks like, making this up for illustrative purposes, it looks like a triangle. And in B, it kind of looks like a circle. And if it's O, it's none. There's no carbohydrate produced. And that's the allele. So if that allele is present, in the case of either a blood type, remember, we're always going to have 2 alleles, even though we have 3 different alleles that we can pass down, potentially. We're still going to only have 2 alleles passed down. So if you happen to be a person who is blood type A, that means that you have one of 2 blood types. You either have, obviously you have blood type A, but you have a genotype that is AA, or you have a genotype that is AO. Okay. Obviously, if it's AA, the only thing you produce is that triangle shape. Well, there's also AO, and in this case, O, the O allele, is recessive to the A. So it's suppressed, and instead of making no carbohydrate, you make the triangle. Same thing happens in B. You can be BB, or you can be BO. Okay. We're good. So you can have two B alleles, or you can have a B allele and you can have an O. And if you have the O, again, it's recessive to B, so it doesn't show itself. And the only thing you see is these little circles on the red blood cell. Now, if you are AB, your genotype and your phenotype are the same. The only gene, and these are all genotypes I'm doing on here. Geno, here's AB. That's it. You're AB. But AB is our example of codominance. Both A and B alleles express themselves. So instead of having just triangles or circles, you have both on the red blood cell. So you see the little triangles here, and you see the little circles as well. Okay. The last kind of blood type you can have is O. And O is only present if you have two O's, two goose eggs. That's it. Okay. And in that case, you don't produce any carbohydrate on the surface. There's nothing there. And being that way, there's nothing for the immune system to find. So if the immune system's trying to find foreign cells and it sees an O cell, it will ignore it because it's looking for a triangle or a circle or something that doesn't match what the human, its owner's body is. So sometimes we call the O type blood type the universal donor because you can give it to anyone and it will not be rejected by their body because the immune system doesn't recognize it, doesn't see it at all. It just goes under the radar. The universal acceptor, what's that? AB. Because they can obviously get O, but they can get A blood because they have A carbohydrates. And they also can take B blood because they have the B carbohydrates as well. So AB can take from anyone. They can only give to AB. Because if anyone else gets them, if somebody with A blood gets AB, the A markers will be fine, but the B ones will be recognized by the immune system as wrong. And the blood will clump. It will clot, and it will kill the person. So you have to be very careful in blood typing. What I have found is that if somebody has, those little ID bracelets like diabetes or hemophilia, for example, they will, if you go to the ER, they will ignore them because they will never give blood without typing your blood first. So actually taking a little bit of your blood and seeing what it is. Because if they're wrong, you're dead. Okay, so you got to make sure that it's correct. I actually had a friend who that happened to. They were hemophilic and they needed blood. And until they typed them, they would not give them blood, even though they had a band that says, I'm hemophilic, I have blood type. I don't remember what the blood type was, but they wouldn't do it. Okay. So it's a big deal. We go to the next slide. Any questions on that? Yeah.
So then do they just save the O blood for real emergencies?
Yeah, so kind of in a pinch, and O is actually not, I never remember this, but O is not the most uncommon. But in a pinch, when they ask for donors, sometimes they'll say, we really, really need O's because of that, because O's can give to anyone. So an example of this, I have somebody who is blood type A, and they have kids with somebody who is blood type B. I'm going to just start you off with a terrible one. What are the possible genotypes for A? AA. So this person could be AA, but they could be AI, or we're going to just use the O. Okay. And the B could be BB or BO. Okay. What if I said that they had a child who has type O blood?
It has to be OO.
Have to be AO, and BO. And I can do the Punnett square to show that. Okay, so they can have a kid who has type O blood, but only if both parents have the recessive allele to pass down. Yeah, I can't even go any further with this one because they can have all the types. They could have a kid who has AB. They could have a kid who has A blood here. They could have a kid that has BO blood or B blood. Okay. A blood or B blood or AB or O. They could have them all. They can have all the types. Right? But that's how you do one of these problems for blood types. Right? Question that usually comes up. Go ahead, Nate.
What does it mean when you're B minus?
Thank you. Question that usually comes up is positive versus negative. I was hoping somebody would bring it up. Let me just click this off here. Pen, clear screen. There we go. So you can also be positive. Oh, that's not positive. That's not even a pointer. You can be positive or you can be negative. And positive is a dominant trait. So if you have, one parent gives you positive, one parent gives you negative, if it's like that, you're going to show positive. Yeah. So not only when you're talking about O blood, and I said O is a universal donor, and well, let me step back. What I should have said was positive is another carbohydrate marker, and positive means you have it. So you either have that marker, or if you're negative, you don't have that marker. So same thing works here. If you don't have that marker, you can pass undetected. So when I say you can have O blood, it actually has to be not O positive. It has to be O negative. Because if you're positive blood type, and you try to give to a negative blood type, the body rejects it because it's looking, it doesn't want to see anything on the red blood cell. And because it sees that positive marker on there, it marks it as foreign. And again, it will cause the body to clot, the blood will clot, and you'll have a problem. Okay. So when they talk about O neg, that's what they're talking about, O negative. Okay, cool. Thank you for bringing that up, Nate. That was helpful. Okay, polygenic inheritance. What does poly mean? Multiple and genetics. So in this case, what we're looking at is traits that are inherited based on more than one gene. And you have quantitative variation, such as height. For example, people are 5'3", people are 5'4", 5'6", all the way, up to whatever. 6'1". There's over 180 genes that affect height. And a lot of them are just, if you have this gene, it adds to your height. If you don't have this gene, it detracts from the height. Now, this is a simplified version, but the same goes for skin color. Skin color is also controlled by multiple genes. And so, again, simplified version, but here's a chart showing you kind of the idea that here in the upper left-hand corner, it's saying that there's six total alleles. And in this person is a pure albino, meaning that they produce no pigment whatsoever. That's pretty rare. But that's because none of those alleles that they have would produce a pigment. Okay. And then you have somebody who's really, really dark skinned down here. And in that case of this made up kind of situation, we have all of the alleles produce the darkest pigment. Okay. That's just an example. There's more to it than that. There's more colors than that. There's more alleles. But just to kind of give you an example of how that happens. So sometimes people are like, well, my mom's short, my dad's tall. It doesn't mean you're going to be halfway in the middle, right? We see a lot of times where somebody's really tall or they're really short because it has to do with which alleles you inherit from your parents. And it doesn't have to be, it's not just dominant versus recessive or an average of what you're, of the two things that you're getting. Multifactorial is another word that you should probably understand. And this is the idea that, and this is a departure from Mendelian genetics, from Mendel's stuff, because Mendel just said there's genetics and these genetics produce, this. But we know from experience in lots of different, life situations as well as in the experimental realm that there can be things in the environment that impact whether or not an allele produces a particular outcome, whether or not it produces a particular protein. So traits that depend on multiple genes combined with environmental factors, it's kind of the key part there, is the environmental factors, are called multifactorial. So, for example, I don't know, I haven't been tested genetically, but my guess is I have probably some disposition towards diabetes in my type 2 diabetes in my genes. But that's multifactorial, meaning that environment plays a role too. So whether or not somebody gets type 2 diabetes has a lot to do with lifestyle, how you eat, how active you are, kind of those life choices. So it's not just genetics. There's other things too. And that's so many genes are like that. And we don't even know in some cases what's happening to impact them. Yeah.
Is that like alcoholism too?
Yeah. Yeah. Different. And even like schizophrenia. So schizophrenia has been shown to be genetic in some instances, but you can take identical twins and one can have schizophrenia and the other one can never develop it. Right? They've shown studies where identical twins have been reared independently and one gets it and one doesn't. So the environment does play a role. I mean, we don't know exactly how that is, but it's definitely, yeah. Okay, so many human traits do follow Mendelian genetics. I want to talk about a few of them. But before we do that, let's talk about pedigrees. So pedigrees are basically family trees. And these are ways to describe the relationship between parents, grandparents, and kids so that you can trace back a trait from where it was first observed to present day and kind of make some suggestions whether or not offspring, kids, will have a particular trait. Now, the one that's shown here, we have two individuals, maybe sisters, who, must be sisters, who either do have a widow's peak. Widow's peak is a little pointy thing in the middle of if you got one, it comes to a little point in your forehead, middle of your forehead. And it is actually a dominant trait. And we can follow this back and we can look at the grandparents and then the parents and then finally the kids. Now, we can tell what her genotype is going to be because she doesn't have it. If she doesn't have it, she has to be two recessive letters. But because it's a dominant trait, we don't know about this young lady because she could be homozygous dominant or she could be heterozygous. Now, big deal. Widow's peak, no widow's peak. It's not like it's life-threatening. But that's kind of the point because you can use this for things that are life-threatening. So you can make predictions about future offspring. What is the possibility that my child will have Tay-Sachs, for example? Yeah.
Is there like a scientific way to determine whether or not it's homozygous or not?
You can actually do genetic testing and look at the genes. Yeah. Yeah.
So it'll basically.
We do have that ability for lots of traits. Yeah. Whether or not you have it in your genetic makeup.
But before it was just like the split testing.
Right. Well, and the thing is, with the pedigrees, it's genetic. You can do genetic counseling. So there are people who go in, and before they have kids, they want to know, are my kids going to be okay if I have kids? Because sometimes there's something in your genetic makeup that you may not be aware of. And if you have kids, it could be really bad for the kids.
To have kids.
To have kids, yeah.
So you should, like, some people just shouldn't have kids.
Well, for example, I think it's Tay-Sachs is in predominantly Jewish communities. And it's very common for two Jewish people who are not related to have that same recessive Tay-Sachs trait. And then if that's the case, then it's 25% of their kids that can have it.
Right.
So you might want to choose to adopt in that case because you don't want, kids don't live very long with Tay-Sachs, and it's usually a pretty brutal couple of years. Yeah, it's not good. So anyway, there's recessively inherited diseases and there's dominantly inherited ones. Some are bad, some are good, not good. Some are like kind of mild, some are awful. And I'm going to talk about a few of them. In order to get a recessive trait, it does mean that it has to be, both parents have to give it to you. So both parents have to give you a recessive allele. So what can happen is parents can be carriers, meaning they're heterozygous. Albinism is an example of that. A big A represents people who are normal pigmentation. But this person, in this case, would be a carrier for it. So they do have the recessive allele for albinism. And if they have kids with another person who is a carrier, again, you might not know it. You can end up with kids who have lack pigmentation. So here, this little kid over here, I'm assuming this is her sister, has the albinism trait. So 2 recessive alleles. What does that mean? It means that there is a lack of pigment produced. And in a pure, someone with pure albinism, they actually have red eyes. Do you know why? They're not producing pigment. What are you seeing? The blood vessels behind their eyes. They see normally, but they're very sensitive to light, and they have to be very careful because they can get. What pigment does for us is it protects us against UV. So if you're going outside and you need sunglasses, yeah, you really do. Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah.
You always have blonde hair.
You actually lack any pigment. So that's white hair because there's no pigment there.
Dude, how is that no pigment? Because it's color, bro.
That seems like a legit question.
It does not.
He is the biggest hater.
He can. You sometimes, Tyler, you are a hater. I mean, you gotta.
We were talking about dick. No. We were talking about. I'm not a hater.
You guys both go back and forth. Let's say that.
You always see me giving my credit.
All right, this is the part where everybody gets a little bit creeped out. Normally, we all have in us maybe 10 or 12 recessive alleles that if they were in the homozygous recessive condition, in other words, we met somebody who also had that recessive allele and we had kids, it could be dangerous to them. Okay. That is not very likely to happen. It's not very likely that we're going to come across an individual that also has the same rare recessive alleles. When that does happen, it's usually because you are fairly closely related. Okay, so, if you're cousins, or if you're brother and sister. See where the uncomfortable comes? It's very likely that you have the same recessive alleles. And if you had kids, your kids could suffer from that. So that is why there is laws in different states about who you can marry in terms of relation, whether or not you're closely related or not. And usually it's you can't I think marry and have kids if you're first cousins. Maybe you can if you're second. I'm not sure about that. It kind of varies by state.
I think you guys are second cousins.
Well, and it also makes a difference whether or not you are of childbearing years. So if you are past childbearing, I mean, this could happen, right? You could be adopted or have a long lost sibling that you didn't know about. It's possible, right? So that's why genetic counseling sometimes is a really good thing, because you're not going to find out whether or not you actually might find out if you're siblings, but it'll tell you whether or not that's a problem. Okay. But that's why cultures have those taboos. They have laws against marrying someone you're closely related to. Well, it's funny because they used to require a blood test. Long time ago, they used to require blood tests, but I don't even know why that mattered, because when you got married, it had something to do with that. But yeah, I think you have to, there's a place where you have to sign that says, I testify that I am not related to this person that I am marrying. Yeah, so. Yeah. So it's 17, the bell rings?
For this,
19?
Yes, sir. I think it is.
Yeah, let's stop there. My throat hurts.